Good morning, students. This is Mr. Tamoko Isaka, once again for English Didactics and Learner Support, examination-based contact class for those who are taking English Didactics and Learner Support in Advanced Certificate in Secondary Education. We have my contact details and my email address and cell phone number. You can contact me Monday to Friday from 8 o'clock to 19 hours. Okay. Now, to begin with, let's start with the aims of this course. Now, the English Didactics and Learner Support aims at enabling students to develop theoretical understanding, values, and competencies of teaching English. And then the core aim of this course is to explain methods, as you can hear from the title Didactics, to enable students to explain the methods, learner support, and other key issues regarding facilitating the learning of grammar, listening and speaking, reading and writing, understanding and speaking, novels, dramas, and poetry, and also assessment in English. Okay, now let's start with the teaching methods. There are so many teaching methods to learn or to go through in this particular model. Now, as I said earlier on, this is an examination contact session where we specifically talk about the layout of the exam and the content of the exam. This is one of them, the learner-centered method. Now, the learner-centered method is a very important method in Namibia, in our education system. That is where learners are seen as individuals with their own pace of learning. That is learner-centered approach. And then we go to the direct teaching approach. The direct teaching approach is also known as the traditional way of teaching a teacher and learners in the classroom. Now, in this case, a teacher is the only source of knowledge. It's not like the opposite of the learner-centered approach, where learners are considered as an active part of the classroom to acquire knowledge. In other words, you also consider that learners have their own knowledge. Now, in the direct teaching method, the teacher is the only source of knowledge, and he must give classroom instructions. Now, what is very important here is that there is interaction, the question and answer exchanges in intensive classes, and grammar is taught inductively. And the new point teaching is introduced orally. So the direct teaching method is, in simple terms, the traditional way of teaching, the oldest way of teaching, the direct teaching method. Now the advantages. The advantages of the direct method is that a teacher has control of the timing of the lesson. Learners are easily monitored, and you give instructions directly. So the curriculum is covered, and then some learning materials cannot be discovered, thus it must be taught directly. The advantages of the direct teaching methods. So learners are easily monitored. You are more like a direct supervisor. So you control your class properly, and then you give instruction. That is the direct teaching method. Now the disadvantages, it is based on old learning theories. As I said, it's referred as the old teaching method. Now, you learn from simple to complex. Teachers cannot assess prior knowledge of learners. That is why certain learners cannot learn. One of the disadvantages. And then retention, that is the memorization of how to solve problem, is very slow in learners. So learners have to struggle with problems themselves. Now, direct instruction, the direct teaching method only works with few learners. You cannot teach a class of 50 learners and you are the only source of knowledge. It is impossible. So learners are only viewed as listeners, the audience. It's one of the disadvantages. So if you give direct instruction to only a few learners, it's a disadvantage instead of teaching a large group of learners. You have your materials, you go through them. As I said earlier on, teaching methods, we have a number of them, but for the sake of this examination session, you go through your learner-centered method and then the direct teaching method, advantages and disadvantages. Okay. Now, let's talk about the difference between behaviorism and constructivism. Now, behaviorism is also based on the direct teaching method because it is founded on the premise that learners can be taught by just feeding them with information and their prior knowledge is not utilized. So behaviorism is linked with direct teaching method. And constructivism is linked to the learner-centered approach, which we said earlier on. Because learner-centered approach is based on the premise that learners possess prior knowledge and that this prior knowledge will assist them to make meaning of new learning materials. So if you want to understand these terms, you take it from learner-centered approach and the direct teaching approach. The direct teaching method is based on behaviorism, and learner-centered approach was founded on the constructivism approach. Now, assessment. Now, assessment is the act of making judgment about something. The evaluation or estimation of the nature, the quality or ability of someone. That is assessment. Now, why do we have to assess our learners in our schools? You assess to give feedback about strong and weak points in your learners, and you assess to suggest improved methods of learning. You also assess to give information to parents about how their children are progressing, to encourage them and to reward, to support, and even to improve your teaching as well. Those are the purpose of assessment. Now, there are so many forms of assessment. Now, for now, let's look at formative assessment. Now, formative assessment is an ongoing process where you assess your learners on a regular basis. So the learner skills are assessed continuously, and then you find out why are they performing in the way they do. That is formative assessment. And then we have summative assessment. Summative assessment, that is the assessment done at the end of a period of learning. They say a learning era. Obviously, the end of year exams are part of summative assessment. Summative assessment is done at the end of a learning era, at the end of an academic year or phase, for example. At the end of the year, the grade 10 and 12 write their exam. So that is summative assessment. So the teacher will build the teaching of the new year on the experience of the previous year when summative assessment is done. Now the most common one, continuous assessment. Why is continuous assessment done in our schools? Continuous assessment is done to provide evaluation on a continuous basis. So marks are awarded for the competencies achieved in the syllabus, which may not all be assessed during a formal written session. So to assess continuously, you must use the CA mark. So you give learner the opportunity to progressively accumulate marks towards a promotional mark at the end of the year. So the marks are added to the results of the summative assessment and then to the promotion mark to promote our learners. Now, what are the characters of good assessment? We have efficiency, significance, and the purpose and impact. Now, under efficiency, the method of assessment must be consistent. It must be the same over and over and over, no changes. And then the content must be covered. And the reflection must be with the study field with the content concerned in the assessment. Now we have efficiency, significance, the purpose and impact, and then validity and fairness, reliability, how reliable are our assessments. Results of the assessment must be reliable to give a true reflection of what the learners have mastered. That is very, very important. As an educator, I have seen parents, learners, they complain, I was supposed to be awarded this and this, but I achieved this and this. So many problems. Now, assessment must be very, very reliable. Good assessment must be reliable to give a true reflection of what the learners have mastered. And then, after an examination or test given, what is the importance of reflecting on our examination or test results? Now, this is so powerful for a teacher. It is important to handle the assessment results appropriately. Now, assessment should be done to establish which competencies your learners have not mastered to inform your future planning. You must know which competencies your learners have achieved and which ones they did not. You may design your own way and your own methods to analyze your results. You will know your weak learners, your good learners, the average ones, and then it's for you to make proper planning. And then when you look at the symbols or marks achieved by your learners at the end of an examination or test period, you must be able to analyze or to indicate, as I said earlier on, which competencies they have mastered and which ones they did not. So in this case, we learn that assessment is not necessarily giving marks for record purposes. It should be done for students to master the competencies given in any curriculum. And then they should guide learners to set personal goals for each subject and how to keep record for their own achievements. Now, before we go to reading, there's one important thing in the importance of reflecting on the examination test results. Now, assessment, the importance of reflecting on examination or test results is very important for you as a teacher and for your learners. Now, for you, you will know which of your learners have mastered the content and which ones did not. Now, for learners, it is good for them to set their own future goals, for their own future planning. Then they know, I've done bad here, so I must improve on this symbol to achieve more grades to master the content. Very important for a teacher and for your learners. Okay. Now, reading. There are so many things to talk about when we talk about reading, but for the sake of our own examination-based contact session, we will talk of the causes of reading. The causes of reading problems in learners. Why do we have problems in our learners in terms of reading? Now, some of them are biologically. Slow learners may have limited intelligence. Now, learners who have adopted a negative attitude towards reading, they will find problems in reading. So those without the interest in reading will find it difficult to read. There will be the unwillingness of reading. And the other thing, where the mother tongue is not English, there may be so many problems in reading. Learners may experience reading problems and may need support and encouragement. The lack of reading culture, no exposure to reading materials while growing up is very, very important as well. So the lack of reading culture, the exposure to reading materials is very important to our learners for them to read. Okay. Now, what are the activities to be employed to motivate our learners to read more? So you set aside a reading space in the classroom where learners can politely and quietly sit and read. We encourage your learners to go to the library to read for enjoyment, as well as borrow books for reading. Now, obviously, any given school or any learning institution, there must be a library. So that place, that room, that building we call a library, you encourage your learners to go in there to read, to encourage them to read continuously in their own spare time. Now, the library must be an inviting place. It must have an inviting atmosphere that learners would want to go there. It must be very quiet, properly managed, and everything must be properly put in place for them to be encouraged to go to read every time and then. Now, you must find out from your learners their interests and provide reading material that will interest them. For example, a group of 35 learners. Some of them would like to read books based on love. Others would like to read books based on animals. Others on different topics. Now, you must know your learners' interests, and then you provide those materials to your learners. As I said, you provide all the materials, magazines, and so forth. And then you must also be a good role model when it comes to reading. You must also be reading yourself as a teacher. You read to them. You bring and share what you have read with your learners. You keep them updated about the interesting readings so as to stimulate their interest. Now you keep them to keep diaries, and you give them a chance to report back to class what they have read. So these ones, I think learners who would like to give report to their friends about what they have read, and it is very interesting. Sometimes you must also let them to dramatize some of the stories they have read. And then you share with them in the classroom. Now the spelling. How teachers can assist learners to improve spelling. Now, you create a classroom environment where you totally discourage wrong spelled words. In this case, you don't rely on spell check, but you pay attention as to how a word should be spelled. The use of dictionaries. In our days, we have the use of technologies. You help them increase their vocabulary by spelling words continuously on a daily basis. And then you can keep a spelling journal where you write down your words you come across, and then the ones you come across for the very first time, you also note them down. You check your word patterns, and then you recognize your phonics. That is the sound of your syllables. Very important under the improving spelling, you stick to the spelling rules. No additions and no subtractions to favor learners. A word must be spelled the way it is to improve the spelling of your learners. And then writing. Under writing, there are problems that learners may experience with writing tasks, like repetition of words, the overuse of adjectives, overused words, the use of slang, and so forth. So these ones are the problems that learners may experience with writing tasks. And as a teacher, you must give them direction. You must give them the way to go, how they must go about with their slang, with their repetition of words and so forth. You must be able to let them know their mistakes. And then redundancy and verbosity, unnecessary big words, and then numerals. When I was working at the showground in this language, I noticed that our learners, your learners have problems in writing numbers. If we say 10 million, write 10 million in words. It's very problematic. Now, you must learn to encourage your learners to write numbers in words. You write your numbers in words instead of numerals for them to have the correct version of whatever they are to write. Now the motivation. How do we motivate our learners to write well? You give frequent or positive feedback that support learners' beliefs that they can do well. You go through your materials, you will find a lot of ways how you can motivate your learners to write well. You create an atmosphere that is open and positive. You help learners feel that they are valued members of a learning community. You encourage opportunities for learners' success by assigning tasks that are neither too easy or too difficult. Now, speaking and listening. Now, in the English language, speaking is another thing. Listening is another thing. Now, sometimes they are combined to make one lesson. Now, how do you motivate your learners to improve their English listening and speaking skills? So you encourage them to take their time in learning the language. They must know the importance of the language they are learning. The more time spent in reading, listening, writing, and speaking, the better the success chances. You stay in touch with the language. You make efforts to listen to the language being spoken. And then be selective of what you listen. But you listen as often as you can. So you encourage your learners to listen as much as they can. Okay, and then learner motivation for listening and speaking. How do you motivate your learners to speak and to listen well? We have internal motivation, external motivation, integrative motivation, instrumental motivation, and it is the last one, instrumental motivation. Now, under external motivation, that is when the language learner is motivated by outside factors to learn. For example, to be able to speak a language, you must get a good education. Now, you must encourage them. These external factors are very important, and they might influence your learners to demotivate them to read. So you encourage them. External motivation is very difficult to control as a teacher because they are outside factors. But internal motivation is very important because you encourage your learners. They must have the drive that a person has to acquire a competence in a language for the person to do better in that language. Okay, this is the end of our presentation. Once more, the presentation was based on our English didactics and learner support for those who are taking advanced certificate in secondary education. Thank you so much, and go through your materials carefully to prepare for the exam.